The other side.
And now, a socially speaking commentary by Perry Red from the other side of the tracks.
The other side.
I'm Perry Red. This is Socially Speaking. I just want to take a minute to share with you our commentary from the other side of the tracks.
This The Other Side of the Tracks commentary defining racism as Trump does it again. Listen, many folks are in flux trying to decide whether or not to expound upon the statement that your so-called President Donald Trump has made.
These are people that if they don't like it here, they can leave. And I don't know who's going to miss them, but I guess some people will. I see them complaining. They're complaining constantly. They're free to leave if they want. And if they want to leave, that's fine. And if they want to stay, that's fine. But the people have to know. And politicians can't be afraid to take them on. They hate our country. They hate it, I think, with a passion. Now, it's possible I'm wrong. The voter will decide. But when I hear the way they talk about our country, when I hear the anti-Semitic language they use, when I hear the hatred they have for Israel and the love they have for enemies like Al-Qaeda.
Folks are trying to understand why there's opposition to what he said. Then there's some folks who are trying to understand why there isn't. Now, it is clear that when the four Democratic congresswomen, known as the Squad, which, of course, that's a term that was used as a pejorative against them. These four female Democrat congresswomen, House members, they responded yesterday to the so-called President Donald Trump's tweet, and they've been responding for 2 days now, 3 days, calling for an impeachment inquiry.
He's arguing the president's racist attack on 4 freshman lawmakers, telling them to go back to their home countries, has demonstrated that Donald Trump is unfit to be president.
Today, we take up punishment. I will vote to impeach him. If you did what the president has done, you would be punished.
But Green's motion was effectively killed for now in a vote late today.
On this vote, the yeas are 332.
That's because, despite pressure from more than a third of her caucus, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has opposed impeachment, concerned it distracts from Democrats' policies. She prefers to proceed with a series of congressional investigations.
That is the serious path that we are on. Not that Mr. Green is not serious, but we'll deal with that on the floor.
I've got to define for you why Trump does it again. You see, there are many people who believe that Trump said nothing that was racist. There are others that believe that everything that Trump has said has been racist. I am of the mind, socially speaking, that Trump is everything opposite of what he promised, even those people, particularly the people that voted for him, that he was a uniter and not a divider, that he was going to serve all the people of this country. Now, any so-called president would do that. Any president would make that commitment. Anyone running for the presidency would make that commitment. I recall the days of the 70s where the key word following the civil rights movement, though I was young, was prejudice. Prejudice was a means of avoiding the term racism. Prejudice was a way that one could say, I have something wrong with me, but it is not the most wrong with me. You must understand that racism is the most wrong that anyone can be in this country. It is greater than prejudice. Racism is greater than even oppression. It's hard to believe. It is greater than even the third element that is combined to make this thing that Donald Trump exudes, power. It is greater than that because it takes all three to understand why what your so-called President Donald Trump said is a reason for people to be up in arms, to be alarmed, to be alerted, to be aware, and to know that it is just one more characteristic in a despotic leader. You see, prejudice is an attitude which is based on limited information, often on stereotypes. Prejudice is usually, but not always, negative. Now, positive and negative prejudices alike are damaging because they deny the individuality of the person, of the human being. And no one, and I mean no one, is free from prejudice. Let us define the second element within your so-called president and the power structure of America. Oppression. You see, the systemic subjugation of social groups by another social group with access to local power is the definition of oppression. And when white Americans, especially those who support Trump, fail to recognize white privilege, their access to local power, and their subjugation of other groups, other subsets of the population, based on the traditions of this country and the traditional path of this country, then they become oppressors. And folks, don't get it twisted. Oppressors know what oppression is. We've seen it in South Africa. We see it in Israel. So understand that oppression equals power plus prejudice. Let's talk about power at this point. Let us talk about power. Access to the resources of his country. When we're talking about housing, banking, when we're talking about all of those important and life-sustaining mechanisms in this country, we then get to understand why Donald Trump's attack on Representative Ayanna Pressley, Representative Ilhan Omar, Representative Rashida Tlaib, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We must understand that this power dynamic is at play. There are 4 women. No one, no group has Trump attacked more than women. And women must be cognizant of that. Women must take that seriously because he does. You see, here's the deal. The access to resources, the ability to influence others, and access to decision makers to get what you want done is why, and it is the definition of white privilege. It is why white privilege exists. It is why white privilege is so strongly and bitterly fought for. You always can recognize it by seeing who's on the other side of this conversation. Who is claiming victimhood status? You see, after the civil rights movement, or at least in the wake of, your so-called president then, well, your president, Richard Nixon, began the defense of white privilege by creating what we understand now as a silent majority. He didn't intend to do that, I don't think. Or at least he did not intend to coin the phrase. And white men became defensive, and that was the need for TV producer Norman Lear to create the character Archie Bunker, to show what that defensiveness looks like. Racism is a form of oppression. Racism fits the definition of oppression. Why? Because racism equals social and institutional power, and that is combined with race prejudice. A system is of advantage based on race. That's racism. So when white people accuse blacks of having all the advantages because of things like affirmative action or policies that allow for fair and equal housing, it is no more than a false equivalency, in the words of a scholar whom I'm very admirable of. You see, racism is a system of oppression that's simply based on race. That is why this country has had to conduct policies that address that racism. It is not unusual, in the words of Tom Jones, for anyone to recognize unfair advantages. It is not unusual for anyone to call those things out. So racism is different from racial prejudice. It's different from hatred, or it's different from discrimination. Racism involves one group having the power to carry out systemic discrimination through the major institutions of this society, or in any society, because we've seen it in South Africa and addressed it as a country. By this definition, there's only one group of people who can actually be racist in this society, because there's only one group of people that hold the lion's share of the resources and fight so bitterly to keep them and need a savior. They need someone who will repeatedly bang that drum of advantage and preference for the dominant group. And the dominant group in America happens to be white people. And the dominant group that hold the lion's share of the resources are white males. So for those who believe that white men should be the arbiters of others' fates, should be the holder of most of the country's resources, and should be the decider of this country's direction, just know that Trump does it again.
The other side.
And that was a Socially Speaking commentary by Perry Red from The Other Side of the Track.
The other side.
The other side of the track.
Red meat